Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Monday, Yom Sheni. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Melissa in Great Neck, Shandor in the Bronx, Bella in Florida, Paula is here too, Ryan wishing everyone a good evening, Paula says shalom, Sharon in New Jersey, Renee in Indiana, Marjorie in Virginia, Aoife in Florida. Welcome everybody. Let's do this. Our daf is page Nun Gimel, page 53. Here in Tractate Gittin, the 19th volume of the Talmud. We're working our way through chapter 5. Today, learning Mishnah number 3 here in chapter 5. The tractate is about the laws of divorce, but we're on an extended digression about rabbinic enactments that were made for the betterment of the world, or that had a relationship with enactments that were made for the betterment of the world, often in the area of contract law, monetary law, damages, as we shall see. Let's do it. Mishnah number 3, chapter 5, with regard to one who renders another's food ritually impure, right? So, not such a problem necessarily, right? You're able to eat food that is impure, that is tameh, ritually impure, unless you're a priest who is not, or a haver, right? So there were people who held themselves to the standards of the priestly class. I mean, I think even a priest could eat food that is impure. I'm not sure about that. He definitely cannot eat teruma, food that is consecrated and that can only be eaten by priests if that food has been rendered impure. Nor can impure food be allowed to come into contact with other kinds of food that would, that might contain teruma and would render that impure. So, with regard to one who renders another person's food ritually impure, or one who mixes teruma, consecrated food for priests, with another person's non-sacred produce, which would certainly cause a problem, or one who pours another person's wine as a libation before an idol, which is a capital sin, in each of these cases causing the other person a monetary loss, if the first person acted unintentionally, he is exempt from paying for the damage. If he acted intentionally, he is liable to pay. That's the Mishnah. Let's go right into the Gemara. It was stated that the Amoraim, the sages, the rabbis of the Gemara, disagreed with regard to the meaning of the word pours mentioned in the Mishnah. So here they're talking about pouring wine before an idol. Pouring wine as a libation before some kind of idolatrous wooden or stone or metal figure that's used in somebody else's religion of idolatry. If a Jew, commits idolatry, that's a capital sin. And one of the forms of idolatry is offering wine as an offering, a libation to an idol, right? So here, somebody's going to pour that wine and the wine belongs to somebody else. Now, the owner of the wine, he didn't do any pouring. He didn't commit the sin. The one who pours the wine commits the sin. The question is, does that render the wine prohibited for the one who owns it? Right? So it was stated that the Amoraim disagree with regard to the meaning of the word pour that is mentioned in our Mishnah. Rav says if he means that this person actually takes the wine and pours it as a libation, Rav says it means that the person actually takes the wine and pours it as a libation before an idol. But Shmuel disagrees. He says it means that the person mixes together kosher wine with wine that had been used in rites of idolatry, so that now it is prohibited to drink or to derive any other benefit from the mixture. We'll mention in passing, that wine is one of those things that Jews who are religious Jews can only drink kosher wine. what object, what substance is there in kosher wine, or let's say what substance is found in non-kosher wine that would be omitted from non-kosher wine? I'm sorry. What is there some substance that's in non-kosher wine that renders it not kosher, that this substance would not be found in kosher wine? Answer, no. Kosher wine and non-kosher wine are both wine, and that's all that's there is wine. What makes kosher wine kosher, it's that it's supervised as it's being made, right? That there's kosher supervision. What is the rabbi who supervises the production of that wine? What is he supervising? Well, he's making sure, of course, there's many kinds of little details that have come into this law over the years, and making sure that all of these practical processes are followed. But one of the main ideas of kosher wine that needed to be supervised really applied more in ancient times, when there was the concern that some of that wine might have been used as a libation before an idol, rendering all of the wine not kosher. Right? So this concern about wine being used as a libation is a very important concern. These days, how many people in the world are pouring wine in front of an idol as part of their religious worship? Not so many. Nevertheless, we have wine that is kosher and wine that is not kosher. Kosher wine requires supervision. It adds expense to it. It's not just that they're making sure that it isn't used as a libation. There's definitely other regulations that are involved. But this was one of the very important aspects of making wine kosher, as the law is inherited from ancient times. Okay. But here what they're saying is, Rav says, what does it mean that somebody, messed with somebody else's wine? Rav says it means he poured it as a libation before an idol. Shmuel is saying it doesn't even have to amount to that. Shmuel says it means that the one who damages the wine does so by mixing together kosher wine with wine that had been used in rites of idolatry, so that now it is prohibited to drink or derive any benefit from the resulting mixture. So the Gemara asks, with regard to Shmuel, the one who says that it means mixing, what is the reason that he did not say that it means actually pouring? Why does he disagree with Rav about this? And the Gemara answers, he could have said to you, one who has committed 2 or more transgressions with a single act is exempt from punishment for the less severe transgression. Consequently, one who committed an act warranting both court-imposed capital punishment and the payment of monetary compensation is put to death, but is exempt from the monetary payment. Therefore, one who pours another's wine as a libation before an idol, that's a capital transgression, receives the greater punishment, i.e. the death penalty for transgressing the prohibition against idol worship. But he is exempt from the less severe penalty of monetary payment for the financial loss that he caused the other person. Now, one thing that's interesting here is they're not really going to discuss the fact that one becomes liable to the death penalty. That death penalty is basically never administered, right? It is a death penalty offense to commit idolatry, but in order for rabbinic court to actually impose the death penalty, it would have had to happen that the person was standing there about to pour wine in front of an idol. The Jew was doing this. And in front of 2 witnesses, somebody warned this person, if you pour that wine in front of that idol, you're going to be subject to the death penalty. And then the person went ahead and poured it anyway, and the witnesses saw both the warning and the transgression happened immediately after the warning was given. And even then, the rabbinic court will probably find an out, because rabbinic courts don't want to impose the death penalty. So even though the death penalty is almost never given, or maybe never given, for this kind of an action, the question is, so if one is liable to the death penalty and the same action results both in the death penalty and monetary damages, and we have the general principle that when there's 2 penalties for the same action, we only impose the more severe penalty and he's exempt from the less severe penalty. Well, so he becomes liable to the more severe penalty of the death penalty, but in fact is not administered in this case, does he then become liable for the monetary damages because the death penalty was not imposed? They're not actually going to discuss that question. What they're going to say is he doesn't become liable to both of these penalties at the same time. The liability for the monetary damages actually comes first and is in place before the death penalty attaches, as we shall see. Right, so therefore, one who pours another's wine as a libation before an idol receives the greater punishment, the death penalty, and he's exempt from the monetary damages. But the other sage, in this case Rav, holds in accordance with the statement of Rabbi Yirmiyah. As Rabbi Yirmiyah says, one who pours another person's wine as a libation acquires it as his own from the time that he lifts it in order to take it for himself, as does any thief. And at that moment, he becomes liable for the payment of monetary compensation. But he does not become liable to receive the death penalty for violating the prohibition against idol worship until he actually pours the wine before the idol. Consequently, the monetary penalty takes effect first, and he also becomes liable to receive the death penalty afterward in a separate act. It wasn't the same action that results in both penalties. He became liable to the monetary damage when he lifted the wine, when he essentially stole that person's wine, and he becomes liable to the death penalty when he pours it in front of the idol. Those are separate actions. Now the Gemara asks, and according to Rav, the one who says that it means actually pouring, what is the reason that he did not say that it means mixing? And the Gemara answers, well, he could have said to you, mixing libation wine with kosher wine is the same as mixing teruma with non-sacred produce, as both involve intermingling that which is forbidden with that which is permitted, so that the entire mixture becomes forbidden. There's no difference between these actions, so there would be no need to mention both of them in the Mishnah. Should have said earlier, we picked up Mishnah number 3 at the bottom of page 52. Now we're actually on page 53, 53a. And the other sage, Shmuel, holds that one who mixes teruma, consecrated food, with another person's non-sacred produce is liable for a fine. And we do not derive a fine in one case from a fine stated in another case, even if the two cases are similar. Consequently, liability for the fine must be mentioned separately for each case. Now, the discussion here is going to go kind of in depth into the question of why does our Mishnah mention these three separate cases, right? One who renders somebody else's food impure, one who mixes teruma with another person's sacred produce, or one who pours another's wine as a libation before an idol. In all of the cases, he causes monetary loss by in some way mixing or rendering somebody's what was permitted into something prohibited. And then the general principle is that if he does it intentionally, he's going to have to pay damages. If he does it unintentionally, he's not going to have to pay damages. But the question they're going to study in depth now is, why were the three examples given? Why was it not enough to say if somebody renders somebody's permitted food prohibited through their action, he's going to have to pay damages if he did it intentionally, but not if he did it unintentionally? Why did the Mishnah include three different examples? And the Gemara is going to show that we needed all three examples because we learned something different from each of the three examples. So the Gemara asks, and according to the one who says that we derive a fine in one case from a fine in another case, why do I need all these cases mentioned in the Mishnah, i.e. one who renders another person's food ritually impure, and one who mixes teruma with another's non-sacred produce, and one who pours another person's wine in a rite of idolatry? And the Gemara answers, all three rulings are necessary. As had the Mishnah taught only the case of one who renders another's food impure, there are two possibilities. If it is referring to one who renders another's teruma non-sacred, then I would say that they imposed a penalty because he ruined it entirely, as it can no longer be consumed by anyone. But if you have teruma, a regular Jew, a non-priest, cannot eat it because it's teruma. It's consecrated for the use of a priest. If you render it ritually impure, tameh, then even the priest cannot eat it. So now that teruma, which was set to be a tithe, separated from somebody's produce and given to the priest so that the produce is now considered tithed, but now the teruma is ruined and nobody can eat it. So you can understand why that would result in a fine. Is ruined entirely. And if we are referring to one who renders another person's non-sacred food impure, not teruma, but just their regular food, then I would say that the fine is imposed because it is prohibited to cause impurity to non-sacred food in the land of Israel. But in the case of one who mixes teruma with another's non-sacred produce, since he neither caused a substantial loss, since the mixture can still be sold to a priest, nor spread impurity in the land of Israel, one might say that a fine is not imposed upon him. And had the Mishnah taught us only the case of one who mixes teruma with another person's non-sacred produce, I would say that a fine is imposed in that case because mixing two different items together is a common occurrence. But concerning one who renders another person's food impure, this is uncommon. So one might say that a fine is not imposed, as the sages did not impose penalties in uncommon cases. And had the Mishnah taught us both the case of one who renders another person's food impure and the case of one who mixes teruma with another person's non-sacred produce, I would say that fines are imposed in both cases because there is no application of the principle that one who has committed two transgressions with a single act, each carrying its own punishment, receives the greater punishment of the two. Neither of these actions carries a punishment beyond paying the fine in the first two examples as it would in the third. But concerning one who pours another person's wine as a libation before an idol, where one does apply the principle that one who has committed two transgressions with a single act receives the greater punishment of the two for which he is liable, as he is liable to receive court-imposed capital punishment for having transgressed the prohibition against idolatry. Here I would say that a fine is not imposed. Therefore, the Mishnah teaches us that he is in fact liable to pay the fine. And the reason for this is in accordance with the statement of Rabbi Yirmiyah, that since he acquired the wine from the moment he lifted it, he became liable to pay the fine before he became liable to receive court-imposed capital punishment, and therefore he is subject to both punishments, and that's why he must pay the fine. And so all three examples teach something different. The Gemara asks, and according to this version of the halacha, that the father of Rabbi Avin taught, which is as follows. Initially, the sages would say that one who renders another person's food impure and one who pours another person's wine as a libation before an idol, they are subject to a fine. And later, the sages returned to say that even one who mixes teruma with another person's non-sacred produce is also liable to pay a fine. So according to this version, that they added that third example later, why do I need all these cases? In this version, the law of one who mixes was added later. After the laws concerning one who renders another person's impure and one who pours another's wine were taught, why could the halacha of one who mixes not be derived from those laws? And the Gemara answers, no. All three rulings remain necessary. As had the Baraisa in this new Tosefta that we're learning taught us only the case of one who renders another person's food impure, I would say that a fine is imposed because there is no application of the principle that one who has committed two transgressions with a single act, each carrying its own punishment, receives the greater punishment of the two. That doesn't apply. But with regard to one who pours another's wine as a rite in idolatry, where one does apply this principle that you only apply the stiffer penalty, one might say that the fine is not imposed. And had the Baraisa taught us only the case of one who pours another's wine as a libation before an idol, that would say that they imposed a penalty because he ruined it entirely, as it is now prohibited for one to derive any benefit from that mixture of regular wine or kosher wine with wine that was used in an idolatrous rite. This mixture, not only can we not drink it, we cannot derive benefit from it at all. A Jew cannot even sell wine to an idolater, wine that was used in idolatry, because he cannot derive benefit from something that was used for idolatry at all. So we might have thought, but but for one who renders another person's food impure, which does not ruin it entirely in this manner, as one may derive benefit from it, for example, by using it as fuel while it is being burned, or by feeding it to his animal, which you cannot do with wine that was used for idolatry, one might say that the fine is not imposed. Therefore, the Mishnah had to teach us all the examples. And had the Brisa taught us only these two cases, I would say that here they impose fines, because in each case there is a substantial loss. But with regard to one who mixes teruma with another person's non-sacred produce, where the loss he causes is minimal, because the owner can still sell the mixture to priests at the price of teruma, one might say that a penalty is not imposed. Therefore, all three rulings are necessary. Now, we go back to the Mishnah and go into the second aspect of our Mishnah, that in all these three cases, one who did it unintentionally, right, mixing somebody's teruma with non-sacred produce, or making somebody's produce impure, or taking somebody's wine and using it in an idolatrous rite, if he did any of those actions intentionally, he pays the fine, but if he did it unintentionally, he does not pay the fine. So regarding this, Hizkiah says, by Torah law, one who commits one of the offenses listed in our Mishnah, whether he did it unintentionally or intentionally, he is liable to pay for the damage that he caused, like any person who causes damage. What difference does it make to the one who owns the wine or the teruma if this other person comes along and unintentionally ruins it? It's still ruined. So you would think that the person, he might have done it unintentionally, but you could still say he did it negligently. And the bottom line is he damaged another person's property. Why does he not have to pay if he did it unintentionally? Hizkiah says that by Torah law, he has to pay. Right? By Torah law, if he damaged it, he has to pay. Makes no difference whether it was intentional or unintentional. And what is the reason for this? For Hizkiah's ruling that by Torah law he has to pay? The reason is that even damage that is not evident is categorized as damage. One is liable for damage not only when the damage is evident, i.e. when he causes a change in the item's physical state, but also when the damage is not evident. For example, when he causes a reduction in the item's value due to a change in its halachic status. For example, when he renders it ritually impure. You can't look at the item and say that that's worth less. Just by sight, you have to know that it became ritually impure. Right? It's just a halakhic change. But the fact is that halakhic change matters, and it did lower the item's value. And therefore, that is damage. Even damage that is not visible is still damage. According to Hizkiah and according to Torah law, you have to pay for that damage if you caused it, whether you did so intentionally or unintentionally. So, and so then therefore, we ask, what is the reason that the sages agree that by Torah law, damage is damage, even if it's not visible. If you actually caused a change that has a monetary impact, then damage is damage. So if by Torah law you have to pay that, why did the sages say that if you did it unintentionally, you don't have to pay the fine? Right? So the sages changed the Torah law in that situation and said that by rabbinic enactment, if you did it unintentionally, you don't have to pay the damages. What is the reason for this? Answer: this is so that the one who caused the damage will inform the injured party about what happened. If a fine were imposed, even in a case where the damage is caused unintentionally, there would be a concern that the guilty party might not report the damage so as to avoid the penalty. In such a situation, the injured party will not know what happened since it's not visible by sight, as the damage is not evident. And he will inadvertently use that which has become impure or mixed with teruma or became prohibited because it was poured before an idol. Right? So the sages are making a policy consideration. We want people who did such an act unintentionally to tell the owner that his wine became prohibited or that his teruma became impure so that he can act accordingly. So the Gemara asks, well, if it is so that there is a concern about this, that we want the guilty party to tell the owner that his teruma or his wine became prohibited, or became impure, or became prohibited, if that is the concern, then the guilty party should become, then the sages should have exempted the guilty party from liability, even if he committed one of these offenses intentionally. Right? So if that's the concern, that we want him to come clean and tell the owner that his wine or his teruma is ruined, well, then even if he did it intentionally, we should exempt him from paying the fine so that the owner will find out what happened. And the Gemara answers, no. You have to understand human nature. Now, since it was his intention to cause the owner damage, he did it intentionally, so will he not inform him? If his goal, right, if the guilty party wanted to damage the owner of the wine or the teruma, then will he not inform him? If he does not tell the owner, the other person will never know that he suffered damage. Consequently, he will certainly inform him of what he did, and that his property is now subject to a prohibition, and there is no concern that the injured party will inadvertently come to transgress the prohibition. This is Hizkiah's opinion. And Rabbi Yochanan says, he analyzes this matter differently. Rabbi Yochanan says, by Torah law, one who commits one of the offenses listed in the Mishnah, whether he did so unintentionally or intentionally, is exempt from liability for the damage that he caused. What is the reason for this? The reason is that damage that is not evident is not categorized as damage by Torah law, according to Rabbi Yochanan. And what is the reason that the sages said that if he committed one of these acts intentionally, that he becomes liable? This is so that each and every person who has a grievance with his neighbor and wishes to cause him harm should not go and render impure the other person's pure foods and say, I am exempt from liability. And the Gemara raises an objection to the opinion of Hizkiah from what we learned in a Mishna that's coming up on page 54b, with regard to priests who disqualified an offering through improper intention in the temple by expressing, while sacrificing the offering, the intention of sprinkling the blood, burning its fats on the altar, or consuming the consumable part after its appointed time. If they did so intentionally, they are liable to pay the value of the offering to its owner, who must now bring another offering. And it is taught with regard to this Mishnah that the sages instituted this obligation for the betterment of the world, so that the priests would not act in this manner toward people to whom they wished to cause harm. When the temple was standing, if you brought, for example, a sin offering, so the sin offering, you would bring it to the temple and then you have to hand it over to the priests. The priests would slaughter, sprinkle its blood on the altar, burn part of the offering on the altar, keep for themselves part of the offering which they would have to eat, and that the priest eating part of that offering is part of the offering process. Now, at any stage in that process, a priest could ruin the offering, could render it disqualified, even by articulating an intent to do one of the processes outside of the time limit. Right? So there's a time limit from when an offering is brought until it has to be entirely consumed. And if a priest just articulated an intention to keep some of that offering around past the time limit, that would actually render the entire offering disqualified immediately. So a priest has that power to ruin a person's offering. If they did it unintentionally, okay, they did it unintentionally. If they do it intentionally because they have some kind of a grudge against the person who brings the offering, the sages want to make sure priests don't do that, so they instituted this penalty. And if you say that damage that is not evident is nevertheless categorized as damage, it should have said that if they acted unintentionally, they are exempt due to the betterment of the world. This is because, according to Hizkiah, if they acted intentionally, they should be liable by Torah law for the damage they caused, and not by rabbinic ordinance instituted for the betterment of the world. And the Gemara answers, that is also what the Tana is saying. And the Mishnah should be understood like this. If the priest acted intentionally, they are liable. But if they acted unintentionally, they are exempt. And the reason that they are exempt is for the betterment of the world. Rabbi Elazar raised an objection based on what was taught with regard to one who performs a task with the water of purification. So we're going to look at another area of law to see what we can learn about damages that are evident versus damages that are not evident, and intentional causing damage versus unintentional causing that damage. And we're going to now look at the water of purification. So the water of purification was a must in the time that the temple was standing, because it's a very serious sin to enter the temple, the grounds of the temple, if you are ritually impure from coming into contact with the dead, like attending a funeral, walking into a graveyard, doing the very beautiful mitzvah of attending to the needs of the dead, and putting them in shrouds, putting them in the coffin, burying them, etc. But you come into contact with the dead. Before you could enter the temple, you need to go through a 7-day purification, which includes sprinkling with the waters of purification on the 3rd and 7th day. The waters of purification, special water containing the ashes of the red heifer. So, that water of purification can only be used for purification. And here we're going to learn that if you took some of the water of purification and used it for some other purpose other than purifying people from corpse tuma, you would render that water of purification disqualified. Rabbi Elazar raised an objection based on what was taught with regard to one who performs a task with the water of purification, i.e., water that is mixed with the ashes of the red heifer, which was used to purify people and objects that had contracted ritual impurity by contact with the corpse, or performed labor with the red heifer itself, the red heifer of purification, and by doing so, he disqualifies it, either the water of purification or the heifer itself. He is exempt according to human laws, but is liable according to the laws of heaven. And if you say that damage that is not evident is nevertheless categorized as damage, then according to human laws also he should be liable. And the Gemara comments that he, Rabbi Elazar, raised the objection and subsequently he resolved it for himself. That which they said, that he performed labor with the red heifer, right? So a red heifer can only, be slaughtered and taken out to the special place, slaughtered and burned, and then its ashes are collected and used for the waters of purification. You can only use a red heifer for that purpose, and there were only 9 red heifers in all of Jewish history during the 1,000 years, right? Or the 1,200 years that we had the tabernacle, the first temple, and the second temple, when we needed the waters of purification. In all that time, there were only 9 red heifers, 1,200 years. And those red heifers, before they're actually slaughtered and then burned and turned to ash, from the time they were born until, they had that honor to be used as the red heifer, they could never have worked. A yoke could not be put on a red heifer and used as a farm animal. And, it's so rare to have a cow that is pure red, no other markings on it at all. And then if you found such a cow and you put a yoke on its neck, you would have ruined it. It could never be used as a red heifer. So here they're asking, well, what if he used it for work? He didn't put a yoke on it, but he somehow derived benefit from the red heifer. What does he mean? Right, so that which they said, that he performed labor with the red heifer, it means that he placed the red heifer in a pen so that it would nurse from its mother and would incidentally thresh, meaning that his action is not defined as having the heifer perform labor. He never put a yoke on that red heifer. But in the pen where it would walk around and nurse from its mother, I guess, they would put wheat on the ground. And I guess threshing, just a cow walking around on the ground will perform an action that is that is useful to the owner of whatever's on the threshing floor, right? So the heifer didn't know it was doing work, didn't feel like it was doing work. It was just walking around its pen, going to and from its mother where it was nursing. But in walking over whatever was placed on the floor, it, performed an action that was valuable to someone. So what would the result be? Meaning that his action is not defined as having the heifer perform labor. And that which they said that he performed a task with the water of purification means that he weighed weights with the water, which is not an actual task performed with the water. And the Gemara asks, but doesn't Rava say water purification, now we're in 53b, with which he weighed weights is fit? And the Gemara answered, it is not difficult. This Barais is referring to a case where he weighs an object with the water itself, and therefore the water is disqualified. And this statement of Rav is that the water is fit is referring to a case where he weighs an object against the water, right? So with the red heifer, if you put a yoke on it and it pulled your plow, disqualified. If it just walked around on the, and it happened to, thresh while it was walking around, it was not aware that it was performing labor. It wasn't designed to perform labor. So that red heifer is not disqualified. In terms of the waters of purification, if you have a vial of that water, right, and I want to know what the volume of my pen is, and I put my pen inside that vial of water and I watch the water rise. So there I actually use the water of purification itself, and that water would become disqualified. On the other hand, if I have a vial of water of purification and I know how much it weighs, and I put it on one side of a scale, and I just want to get the weight of my pen, not its volume, and I put my pen on the other scale, right, the old-fashioned scales that go like this, and I just want to see what is the weight of my pen in comparison to my little vial of water of purification, that would not render the water of purification unfit, because we didn't really do anything with the water itself. We just used the fact that we know how much that vial of water weighs, and that would not render it unfit. Now the Gemara asks, if he weighs an object with the water itself, then he performs a real task with it. And if damage that is not evident is nevertheless categorized as damage, then he should also be liable according to human laws to pay for performing a task with the water of purification. Rather, it is necessary to say that both this and that refer to a case where he weighed an object against the water, and still it is not difficult. This Barais is referring to a case where, in the course of weighing the object, his attention was diverted from guarding the water. And owing to this lapse in attention, the water became disqualified. And that other statement of Rava's is referring to a case where his attention was not diverted, and therefore the water did not become disqualified. Rav Papa raises an objection against Chizkiya's opinion from that which is taught in a Baraisa. Chizkiya is the one who says that by Torah law, damage is damage, whether intentional or not. If one robbed another of a coin and afterward the coin was rendered invalid by the government, or if he robbed another of teruma and the teruma became ritually impure, or if he robbed another of leavened bread and Passover then elapsed over it, rendering the leavened bread forbidden. In each of these cases, the robber can return the item and say to the robbery victim, that which is yours is before you. What I took, I have returned it to you. The fact that after I took it, conditions changed and the object became worthless doesn't change the fact that I've returned what I took. So the robber is credited with returning the object, even though the conditions changed. And the Gemara concludes, so this is in fact a conclusive refutation, and the opinion of Chizkiya is rejected, and that's good because his opinion disagrees with our Mishnah, which says, right, that the intentional one who causes damage, even though that damage is not evident, he pays the fine, but one who does it unintentionally doesn't pay the fine. The Gemara suggests, let us say that this Amoraic dispute, right, dispute between sages of the Gemara, is parallel to a dispute between the Tanaim, the sages of the Mishnah, as it was taught in a Baraisa, with regard to one who renders another's food ritually impure, or one who mixes teruma with another's non-sacred produce, or one who pours another's wine as a libation before an idol, whether he did so unintentionally or intentionally, he is liable to pay for the damage he caused. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. Either way, intentional or unintentional, you pay. That disagrees with our Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda says, if he acted unintentionally, he is exempt. If he acted intentionally, he is liable to pay. That squares with our Mishnah. And the Gemara suggests, what? Is it not that they disagree about this very issue? As one sage, Rabbi Meir, holds that damage that is not evident is nevertheless categorized as damage. Consequently, one is liable to pay even if he caused the damage unintentionally. And the other sage, Rabbi Yehuda, holds that such damage is not categorized as damage. And consequently, one is liable to pay only if he caused the damage intentionally, not because by Torah law he would have to pay for that damage since it's not evident damage, but rather because the rabbis instituted that he pays because he caused this non-evident damage that is nevertheless damage, and because he caused it intentionally. That's why by rabbinic decree he has to pay the fine, not by Torah law. Now, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said that it is possible to say that everyone, including Rabbi Meir, agrees that damage that is not evident is not categorized as damage. And here, what they disagree about is with regard to this question. Did the sages penalize an unintentional offender due to an intentional offender? Right? Sometimes the sages end up making a law that is going to apply beyond the intended target of the law, and they're not going to draw a distinction because such a distinction might cause confusion, right? So it might be that, listen, if you cause damage, whether it's evident or not, you're going to have to pay. And we're going to penalize the unintentional person who causes that damage, the same as the intentional person, because we don't want to confuse the public. And so it's much easier to tell the public, if you cause damage, even damage that is not evident, you have to pay. Whether it was intentional or unintentional makes no difference. That's not where the law came out, but we might have thought that the law would go that way. Right? And so one sage, Rabbi Meir, states that one who caused the damage is liable even if he acted unintentionally, because he holds that they penalize unintentional offenders due to intentional offenders, not drawing that distinction. And the other sage, Rabbi Yehuda, who states that one is liable only if he acted intentionally, he holds that they did not penalize unintentional offenders due to intentional offenders. Rabbi Yehuda holds, no, the sages made that distinction. They publicly announced that they're making that distinction, and the law is different for the unintentional offender versus the intentional offender. The Gemara comments, but then it is possible to raise a contradiction between one statement of Rabbi Meir and another statement of Rabbi Meir. And it is also possible to raise a contradiction between one statement of Rabbi Yehuda and another statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Let's see how. So it was taught in a Baraisa in tractate, or in the Tosefta on Shabbos 2:5, with regard to one who cooks on Shabbos. If he did so unintentionally, he may eat what he cooked. He didn't know it was Shabbos. So since he did it unintentionally, he may eat what he cooked. But if he acted intentionally, he may not eat what he cooked. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir makes a distinction between intentional and unintentional violation of Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda says, if he cooked the food unintentionally, he may eat what he cooked, but only at the conclusion of Shabbos. If he cooked it intentionally, he may never eat what he cooked. That is the law. Now the Brisa continues. Rabbi Yochanan Hassanler says, if he acted unintentionally, what he cooked may be eaten at the conclusion of Shabbos by others, but not by him, as the food is forbidden to him forever. If he cooked the food, let me make sure what the law is before we go on. One who cooks on Shabbos, right, from Shulchan Aruch, right, here's the law came out. If a Jew intentionally performs a prohibited labor on Shabbos, he is prohibited from benefiting from it forever. But another person may benefit from it after Shabbos. If he did so unintentionally, everyone is prohibited from benefiting from it until after Shabbos, in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, and contrary to the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Some say that the ruling here is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, that if he performed prohibited labor unintentionally, it is permitted even to him immediately. Some rely on this lenient opinion in pressing circumstances. Okay. So where was it? Rabbi Yochanan HaSandler says, if he acted unintentionally, that he cooked, then what he cooked may be eaten at the end of Shabbos by others, but not by him, as the food is forbidden to him forever. That's not the law. If he cooked the food intentionally, what he cooked may never be eaten neither by him nor by others. Consequently, there is a contradiction between one statement of Rabbi Meir and the other statement of Rabbi Meir, and also a contradiction between one statement of Rabbi Yehuda and the other statement of Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara answers, no. There is no contradiction between one statement of Rabbi Meir and another statement of Rabbi Meir, because one can draw a distinction between them. When Rabbi Meir penalizes an offender for even an unintentional offense, it is where the offender violated a rabbinic law. For example, he rendered food impure. That's by rabbinic prohibition. But where he violated a Torah law, for example, he cooked on Shabbos, he does not penalize him. And the reason for this distinction is that people treat Torah prohibitions more seriously. And consequently, there's no need to impose a fine for unintentional transgression in order to distance people from the transgression. Whereas people might treat rabbinic enactments more lightly, so they need to be reinforced. And the Gemara, I'm almost done. Questions or comments, get them in. The Gemara asks, but isn't pouring wine as a libation before an idol prohibited by Torah law? And even so, Rabbi Meir penalizes the offender even if this transgression is unintentional. And the Gemara answers, this is an exception to the principle. Due to the severity of the prohibition against idol worship, even Rabbi Meir penalizes the offender even if he acts unintentionally. The Gemara continues, and there is also no contradiction between one statement of Rabbi Yehuda and the other statement of Rabbi Yehuda. When Rabbi Yehuda does not penalize an offender for an unintentional offense, it is where he violated a rabbinic law. But where he violated a Torah law, he penalizes him even if he transgressed unintentionally, owing to the severity of the transgression. And the Gemara asks, but isn't pouring wine as a libation before an idol prohibited by Torah law? And even so, Rabbi Yehuda does not penalize the offender if he acted unintentionally. Gemara answers, the argument raised previously can be reversed. Due to the exceptional severity of the prohibition against idol worship, people avoid it on their own. And so there is no need to impose a fine for unintentional transgression in order to distance people from it. The Gemara comments, but then it is possible to raise a contradiction between one statement of Rabbi Meir and another statement of Rabbi Meir, even with respect to matters that are prohibited by Torah law, as it is taught in a Baraisa with regard to one who plants a tree on Shabbos. If he does so unintentionally, he may keep the tree. If he acted intentionally, it must be uprooted. And if he planted the tree during the sabbatical year, then whether he did so unintentionally or intentionally, it must be uprooted. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. Tomorrow we'll pick it up with Rabbi Yehuda's statement on this subject. Let's take a couple of questions on Gittin 53. Jonathan, here's a weird thing I don't have an answer to. If you are pouring from a pure bottle into something that is impure, the impurity does not travel up the liquid into the bottle, I think. But here we are in this hypothetical pouring in front of an idol. So, does the impurity infect the remaining liquid? And what if we just walk by the idol with a closed bottle? In other places, I forget which page, we find that intention matters. So maybe it is the intention that infects the remaining wine. This is a great nuance that you're bringing up, and I'm not sure what the answer is. I'm not sure. We talked about that the impurity doesn't necessarily travel up the chain of transmission. Like Mythbusters will talk about, somebody urinating on an electrified track. Can that electricity, flow up the stream? And we talked about, a little bit of that when we talked about this subject, right, of pouring something pure into something impure, right? So that resulting mixture is definitely no good. Does the impurity somehow travel up the stream? Or we also had this case, in a mikvah, and whether the water can, sort of be understood to flow backward in any way. And I don't really remember the outcome of that discussion. But here, are we saying that somebody has a bottle of wine and he poured out some of it before an idol? does that mean that the rest of the wine in the bottle now becomes discredited because that bottle was used in the action? And so even though the wine that stays in the bottle didn't get poured before the idol, does the whole bottle get rendered unfit? And I think the answer is yes, but I'm not sure. And we could also, as we've seen, sometimes the sages will clarify, simplify the example so that we're sure we understand it. If the wine was poured before the idol and the nature of, whatever idol that was, they would pour the wine in front of it, and then that wine would be collected and then would later be drunk by those idolaters. Now that wine, for sure the wine we're talking about that ends up in that bottle was wine that had been poured for the idol, then obviously that wine would be prohibited and we couldn't even derive benefit from it in any way. And I apologize. Okay, I got one more question, but it seems like a complicated question. I don't know if I'm going to be able to answer. I'll give it a quick shot. Joseph says, I was thinking about how we were talking about Hasatan, right? Satan, right? Satan in the Jewish view, remember, is the adversary. It's the prosecutor in the heavenly court. He's an angel, right, who is deputized by God to do this, right? So he's not like the Lord of some other world who's at war with God. Quite the contrary. He is doing the job he's supposed to do. However, in doing that job and accusing, God's children, bringing charges against God's children for the sins that we commit, he will entrap us, right? So Satan is not limited by the laws of entrapment. He will create situations where, he will create the opportunity for us to commit a sin and lure us into that, just to then turn around and show God, see, look how your children are committing sins. So in that sense, Satan, acts in a way very similar to, that view that we have outside of Jewish religion about what Satan is. But at any rate, so we were talking about that yesterday. So Joseph says, I'm wondering if there are any sources on idol worship and nefarious spiritual entities, because there are those who say idolatry is not a spiritual act since idols are non-living things, but if it's false worship of spiritual beings that aren't the one God of Israel via the idol, then we should stay far away from houses of idolatry. Idolatry, I'm not sure I understand your question, Joseph, but what I'll say is this. Idolatry is such a serious offense that we don't come anywhere near it, right? So you could say that, first of all, we don't understand other people's religions as well as we do our own, but we understand that if we see them bowing to some idol, we're not going to really probe and understand exactly what is their philosophy of what it is that they're bowing to and what is, their deity, and whether it's spiritual or embodied in the wooden idol or the idol represents something that's somewhere else. We don't care. We don't come anywhere near idolatry. And anything that was used in any procedure that could remotely be connected with idolatry becomes prohibited to a Jew because we distance ourselves from idolatry. Idolatry, you could say it doesn't seem like so terrible, like a person takes a knee and then gets up, before a wooden statue. How could you compare that to murder or rape? Right? And because under traditional Jewish law, idolatry, murder, and rape are at the same level. And this is to show you how serious an offense idolatry is considered and how careful we will be to utterly distance ourselves from it. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's what I've got for today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Tuesday, at the regular weekday time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great night.